Hello, and welcome to the Arbitration Conversation. In this episode, we are going to talk to Arthur Pearlstein. Arthur Pearlstein serves as the Director of Arbitration at the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Services, where he oversees a roster of 1,000 private labor arbitrators and provides education, training, and consultation for arbitrators and advocates. He has previously served FMCS as mediator, as General Counsel of the agency, and as head of its ADR and International Programs. Arthur has substantial experience, I know that, in arbitration and mediation as a private sector lawyer, manager, professor, and trainer. Arthur was a professor of law and inaugural director of the Werner Institute for Negotiation and Dispute Resolution at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. He was recently elected as a fellow of the College of Labor and Employment Lawyers. I can also personally say that Arthur is one of the leaders in the area, and I was very happy to meet him a couple years ago, and am even more excited that he was willing to join us for an arbitration conversation. So first of all, Arthur, thank you for taking time with us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you, if virtually again, Amy.
Yeah, too bad the last time I got to see you in person.
Yeah.
Exactly. So as we're talking about FMCS, I mean, this is a very large operation, very known, but if you could tell us a little bit about FMCS and the arbitration program.
Oh, sure. Well, FMCS, or Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, was created under the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, basically with the mission of helping to keep so-called industrial peace, union management relations, and are using dispute resolution, focusing on mediation, but also providing arbitration. So our arbitration roster, while we do mediation through our own full-time employees, our arbitration roster, which, as you mentioned, is about 1,000 labor arbitrators, consists of private arbitrators. They are not our employees. They are not even under contract with us. Instead, FMCS vets them in terms of meeting our standards and qualifications. So we have the roster, and then parties to collective bargaining agreements, labor contracts, get when they need what we call a panel, a group of arbitrators from which to select typically one. They submit a panel request, and we get between 10 and 15,000 requests for arbitration panels.
Wow. Wow. Oh, wow. I did not realize there was that many. That's interesting.
It's a lot.
How do you, and then how do you decide on how do you decide as far as qualifications to even get on the roster?
Like most kinds of arbitration, really subject matter expertise is the main thing. There's a requirement of extensive and including relatively recent experience in the world of collective bargaining agreements and labor relations and so forth. And they also have to either submit some arbitration decisions, 5 of them,
oh, wow.
Or they can we have a special intensive training course called Becoming a Labor Arbitrator. They need to be experienced in subject matter experts, but they can take that course, and then they have the option of doing an apprenticeship, shadowing 1 or 2 arbitrators, and doing they do 3 shadow awards as part of it. And then there are letters of recommendation that are required. And then they also have to certify before they can join the roster that once they join, they will give up any kind of advocacy in the world of labor or employment.
Right.
And so when parties request a panel from us, the panel is randomly generated based on parameters that are set. Geography being the most obvious one. But if the parties agree, they can also specify that they want the arbitrator to be an attorney. Quite a few arbitrators are not attorneys. Quite a few advocates in labor arbitration are not attorneys. They can require or not that the arbitrator be a member of the National Academy of Arbitrators, which is a sort of a prestigious association. They don't have their own roster, but they are a professional association. Or they can, or I should say, they could specify that the arbitrator also be on the AAA roster. They can specialize, they can specify certain subspecialties. And in the past year and a half, we've created the option that they can specify, if they want, that the arbitrator has to be ready, willing, and able to do a virtual arbitration. Mm-hmm. And or they can specify that the arbitrator has to be ready, willing, and able to do an in-person arbitration. So that's
that's a lot, though. Yeah, that's really interesting, especially the shadowing and sort of allowing for these opportunities, to learn about the area. As I think about a student, for example, who thinks, well, gosh, how could I ever become a labor arbitrator? And those are wonderful programs. So, and then when it comes down to it, and the parties have this list, how do they make the decision? My guess is then you're providing them this kind of list, and then it's up to the parties to select one arbitrator from that list. Maybe you could explain a little bit about how that process usually works and what sort of things they're looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually done some research on this, and in general, people think in terms of arbitration of all kinds, at least we're, relatively even playing field arbitration, like commercial, international, and so forth. Trying to find an arbitrator who's more likely to vote for their side. But it's actually a little more subtle than that, because most of the best arbitrators, don't have, a reputation for deciding for one side or the other. Otherwise, they're not going to have a very successful career in arbitration. So in terms of overarching factors, number one is probably reputation, or thinking of it another way, visibility of the arbitrator. How well known, what kind of reputation for fairness. Another is predictability. Parties tend to be very risk averse in the selection of labor arbitrators, as they probably are in other areas of arbitration. But they're not looking at necessarily just a count of who wins more, which side wins more, but rather, what does the arbitrator consider? What types of cases are they more likely to be sympathetic with certain arguments, and so forth. And then those are the two big ones. Then, there are other factors that kind of overlap within some of those, like the educational background of the arbitrator, the type of experience that the arbitrator has had, both in arbitration and in their prior work in the labor field. And sometimes professional background, whether a lawyer or not, or whether, economics background or HR or something like that. One thing that's generally not a big factor is the arbitrator's daily fee rate. Not very, it's a pretty inelastic, as they would say in the world of economics,
right?
Demand.
Well, and it kind of is a good segue, because I know you've written about the marketplace of arbitrators. Yeah. And now as you're talking about it, it makes sense. Maybe you want to explain a little bit about what you mean by that.
Yeah. I believe that arbitration is a marketplace service. In other words, it's a service that that customers, essentially business customers, need to procure. And so the customers shop for the service as they might for other kinds of services. But it's rather unique in that, unlike almost any other kind of service in arbitration, the consumers actually come in adversarial pairs. So it makes for a different kind of buyer process, and because obviously these pairs of consumers have different and typically opposing preferences in the selection of the service provider. So, and it means that the selection process is very, very important. It's also an example of a special type of market in that it exhibits what in the world of science scholarship and research is called the Matthew effect. Basically, with the Matthew effect, a scientific researcher, scholar who gets some recognition early on, gets a grant early on, then tends to get more success, and with that success they get more grants and so forth. And what happens is even other researchers who might have virtually the same background and skills and abilities are left far, far behind. Yeah. It's also similar to what's sometimes called a superstar market or a winner-take-all market, in that a very small percentage of arbitrators get the lion's share of the work. Right. So in terms of economics, the difficulty of gaining that reputation and visibility is, in a way, at least I argue, a barrier to entry. And it makes it difficult for new arbitrators. That also creates an issue with, our labor arbitration, at least, it is pretty far behind in terms of building a more diverse universe. There's been some slow improvement, but still way behind, particularly when it comes to minorities. And one of the issues is that as minorities begin to join the arbitration rosters, they like any other new arbitrator will have a hard time breaking in. So
well, and I think that's also kind of my last question, which is, I guess, the hardest in some ways is, just the challenges, and what have you seen as the biggest challenges in running the arbitration program with FMCS?
Well, gosh, I would hardly know where to start. There are lots of them. We've had lots of, to manage a system where we have so many requests and going on, there's a lot of technology involved. And we've now to the point where the software system, the online system that we have is very good and very useful. But that was a huge challenge, developing it, to become more user-friendly for the customer, the parties, and the arbitrators, and frankly for us at FMCS. And we still have to deal with, things change. We need to make improvements, and that costs money. Another challenge is I see a lot gaming of the system by parties. For example, one party will try to refuse to cooperate in the selection process, or they will claim, oh, the case is not arbitrable, and therefore they're not going to participate. And I always have to explain, well, we don't decide arbitrability. We just enforce the terms of your collective bargaining agreement as to how the selection process takes place. But sometimes the collective bargaining agreement does not give us instructions as to what to do with a non-cooperating party. We have arbitrators tend to be older because they tend to do it in retirement, although not always. And in some cases, to be honest, some arbitrators don't know when it's time to retire. Kind of hang on past the point where they're willing to be timely in scheduling hearings and in issuing decisions, or in labor arbitration, we call them awards. That is an issue. And as I alluded to, this past year and a half with COVID, dealing with new demands, in many cases for virtual arbitration, has been a challenge, especially since it's very often the case that the two parties, the adversarial pairs of consumers, may not agree on whether the arbitration should be virtual or should be in person. And so all kinds of conflict about that. And often these complaints come to me. Often arbitrators come to me about what do I do? And one of our roles is, in enforcing the Code of Professional Responsibility for labor arbitrators, and making sure our arbitrators are, working to a certain standard. That's been a real challenge this past year.
I bet. Yeah. Those were all really good. And thank you for, I thought those were just wonderful examples and just so candid. So I really appreciate that, because they're very real. It's not all fun and games. It's hard work. And it's no wonder you're very good at your job, juggling all these different balls in the air. And I definitely get that. Well, listen, I have to say thank you so much for taking the time. This is really informative. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the viewers will as well. So thank you, Arthur, and have a wonderful day. Hopefully next time I see you, it'll be in person again.
Yeah, I hope so. It's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me, Amy.
Take good care.
Okay, bye-bye.